Avan in ancient myths and parallel stories. Avan's name may be rare in biblical circles, but her essence, the first daughter, appears in the myths of countless cultures. It is as if humanity, scattered across continents and ages, could not forget the figure of the first woman born after creation. In Sumerian mythology, we find tales of women like Ninsun, wise mother of Gilgamesh, whose presence is tied to beginnings and wisdom. In Greek legend, the first woman created by the gods was Pandora, a figure who, like Eve, is blamed for unleashing hardship upon mankind, but who also represents curiosity and the spark of human agency. Egyptian traditions speak of Isis, a divine mother figure tied to magic, fertility, and the rebirth of the land. While not first in a literal sense, she embodies the same archetype of woman as nurturer and cultural foundation. Even in Native American traditions, there are stories of the first woman's daughters, often depicted as bridging the gap between divine creation and human settlement. These women tend gardens, teach the first skills of survival, and sometimes bear the burden of reconciling warring brothers or rival tribes. Anthropologists see this repetition as more than coincidence. The first daughter archetype reflects a universal human reality. In the earliest communities, women were not only life-bringers, but also the keepers of knowledge. They remembered where water could be found, which plants could heal, and which paths were safe. In oral traditions, these roles often crystallized into mythic characters. If Avan truly lived, her story may have been preserved in fragments, retold in different lands and languages until her name changed, but her essence endured. Perhaps in the Middle East, she was remembered as Awan, in another region as an unnamed sister, in yet another as a goddess-like figure embodying life's beginning. From a theological standpoint, the universality of the first daughter could be seen as evidence of a shared memory, the echo of a real woman whose existence was passed down through cultural storytelling. From a scientific perspective, it is an example of parallel myth-making, where similar human experiences give rise to similar stories without a single shared source. Either way, Avan's shadow is global. She is not merely an ancient footnote, but a thread woven into humanity's collective imagination. Her story connects the biblical Eden with the Sumerian plains, the Nile's fertile banks, and the distant forests where indigenous peoples told their own tales of the world's first families. And in that connection lies something profound. Even if Avan's literal existence can never be proven, her presence in our myths suggests she is part of something larger than fact. She is part of what it means to be human. The emotional core of Avan's life beyond debates of faith and science. Avan's story draws us in because it is deeply human. She was, if the traditions are true, the first girl ever born. And that title, so extraordinary, was not accompanied by glory or comfort, but by the weight of survival. Her earliest memories would have been shaped by the presence of her parents, Adam and Eve, who carried both the wonder of being the first humans and the sorrow of having lost Eden. Avan would have grown up hearing stories of that lost garden, of trees heavy with fruit, rivers pure and unending, and a life without pain. To a child, those stories must have sounded like impossible dreams. She would have played with her brothers, perhaps racing across the open fields or helping her mother gather food. She would have learned quickly that life was labor, grinding grain, tending fires, stitching together coverings. Every day was a battle against hunger, cold, and the unknown. But then came the day that would define her life, Abel's murder. The first act of human violence, the first death she would ever witness. There were no rituals for grief yet, no cemeteries, no traditions to follow. Just raw loss and the terrible knowledge that one brother had killed the other. If the accounts are true that she became Cain's wife, her life would have been even more complicated. She would have carried with her not only the grief of losing Abel, but the burden of loving a man who had taken her brother's life. For us, this is unthinkable. But for her, it was perhaps a duty, a way to ensure humanity's survival. Theologians might see in this a reflection of God's ability to bring life even out of tragedy. Anthropologists might see a practical necessity in a small, isolated population. But for Avan herself, it was likely a mix of duty, sorrow, and resilience. She may have been the first to understand that human life is not only about survival, but about enduring loss, reconciling with pain, and continuing to build despite the past. If Adam and Eve were the first humans to disobey God, Avan may have been the first to truly forgive, not in theory, but in the raw reality of human relationships. Her legacy, then, is not only biological, but emotional. She represents the endurance of love in the face of betrayal, the quiet courage to carry on when the world is still learning what it means to be human. The debate that won't end. The question of Avan's existence is one that will likely never be settled, and perhaps that is exactly why it continues to captivate. On one side stand the theologians and faithful readers of Scripture who see her as an undisputed historical figure. To them, the omission of her name in Genesis is no mystery. The Bible was not written to catalog every life, but to tell the story of God's relationship with humanity. The Book of Jubilees simply adds a detail that fits naturally into the biblical framework. On the other side are historians, anthropologists, and scientists who approach the story as myth layered over human history. They argue that even if there was no literal Avan, there must have been early women who filled her role in reality, the first mothers in small, scattered bands of humans. Avan, to them, is a stand-in for countless unnamed women whose lives were no less important. In between are those who see truth in both. They argue that the human mind craves stories because they preserve truths in ways that raw data cannot. Perhaps Avan's story was a way of remembering a real woman or many women whose names are lost but whose role in shaping humanity was monumental. The debate isn't just about evidence, it's about meaning. The believer asks, what does her story tell us about God's plan? The scientist asks, what does it tell us about human evolution? And both must admit that neither has the full picture. In a way, Avan has become more powerful in her mystery than she might have been in certainty. Because she is just out of reach, she forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, to wrestle with the tension between faith and reason, and to admit that both are needed if we are to truly understand ourselves. Perhaps the real point is not whether she lived exactly as the Book of Jubilees describes, but that her story continues to make us ask the biggest questions. Where did we come from? Who were the first to walk this earth? And what stories are still buried in the dust of time, waiting to be told? Closing revelation. In the end, the story of Avan, the first daughter, is a mirror. Hold it up, and you will see in it whatever you bring: faith, skepticism, longing, curiosity. If you approach it as a believer, you may see a young woman whose life proves that even in the earliest days, God was at work weaving the tapestry of humanity. If you come as a scientist, you may see her as a symbolic figure representing the unbroken line of mothers who carried our species through the most fragile stages of existence. But either way, she is a reminder that beginnings are rarely simple. The first chapters of humanity's story are full of gaps, silences, and mysteries. And perhaps they are meant to be, because in those gaps, we are invited to imagine, to seek, and to wonder. Avan's name may never be found carved into stone. No archaeological dig will uncover a burial site marked first daughter. But in a way, her legacy is written in something more enduring than stone. It is written in us. Every person alive today carries within them the echo of those first generations, the struggles and triumphs of those who lived before history began. Perhaps the truest thing we can say about Avan is that she lived, whether as an individual or as an idea, in the collective memory of humankind. Her story bridges faith and science, past and present, reminding us that our origins are both physical and spiritual, both fact and meaning. So the next time you look into the night sky, remember this. Somewhere in the very first dawns of human existence, there was a young woman standing beneath that same sky, breathing the same air, wondering about her own place in the world. Whether you call her Avan, Awan, or simply the first daughter, she is part of the story that made you. And perhaps, in ways both mysterious and profound, you are part of hers.